Welcome back to the conversation. It is Adrienne Lawrence. And I know that on Tuesday, there were a few primaries going on, and there are a lot of things to do and prepare for when it comes to the midterms. And fortunately, I have the AAPI Victory Alliance Executive Director, Varun Nikore, joining us today to explain the work the Democrats have cut out for them. Thanks for joining us, Varun.
Thank you for having me again.
Yes, so much chatter, so much to do. Biden passed the historic act, or at least he signed it, and it seems that the Dems are looking pretty good, but they have their work cut out for them. Where would you start?
Well, better late than never. We got it passed in the nick of time. We are in the dog days of August, and you're absolutely right. We have two primaries today that we're keeping our eye out on, specifically because, right, we've seen what happened in Kansas 2 weeks ago with the historic turnout of progressives and women and folks of all stripes that really kind of shocked the system in terms of beating back on restrictions on Roe versus Wade, abortion rights, abortion health care. So that is a good bellwether. And then a week later, we saw some special elections that also gave us some positive indications of how November could end up unfolding from the perspective of electoral sort of tailwinds. And tonight might be further indications of what we might see. And what we are looking for specifically tonight are Democrats overperforming? There's a special election in Alaska. God help us if Sarah Palin wins that special election. We do not need her on the national landscape. And then, of course, we're all dreading, of course, what might happen to our favorite Republican, Mary Cheney in Wyoming. So a lot to uncover for tonight, and maybe see how well November may shape up for us on the left.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, the prospect of Palin being involved in the federal arena. As she chose before, trying to go for the vice president, and I actually would argue that that's what she's also vying for here to some extent in terms of riding on Trump's coattails. But I'm sure she'd have to fight Marjorie Taylor Greene for that spot, and I'm sure that would be entertaining. But in terms of all the entertainment that is going on, when it comes to things the Dems have lined up for them that a lot of people are still waiting resolution on. For example, student loans. Kind of where do things stand with the Dems and what they plan to do to win over those of us who aren't there yet?
That's a great question. I would say that there are not the investments that we needed in the climate, right? I think that makes a lot of core progressives happy. But you're right, we didn't get the wins that we had wanted. I would say that we very much got behind the curve, if you will, on the expectations game. And politics is frankly a lot about expectations. I think we overpromised a lot to our side after Biden got elected and after we had won the Senate. And it's still, I think, kind of creating some challenges for us as to how we message to our own side about what we can realistically get done in such a partisan environment, such a divided Congress. But that being said, I have not seen much on student loans. I've heard a lot of maneuvering apparently going on. I don't think they've settled on anything, frankly. And at the end of the day, right, Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, at least for the next several months, are going to be deciding for all Democrats whether something like this gets passed or not. Not optimistic at this stage, but at least in terms of the overall Senate makeup, I mean, we have some doozies, if you will, of Senate races coming up with just really crazy folks, Dr. Oz, and many others who are running, not doing a very good job, and things are looking okay for us. I will feel a little bit more optimistic if the current polling on the Senate maps around the country hold after Labor Day. typically that's when I think a lot of folks like me look at and see if trends are solidifying, if they're continuing, are they reverting, that sort of thing.
Yes, and it should be very interesting to watch. And I know that in your work, you specializing in uplifting the voices and addressing the issues that concern the AAPI community, that's Asian American Pacific Islander. And so in terms of the demographic really being reached, it seems that candidates aren't necessarily getting involved or reaching out.
I don't think they're doing as good of a job as they frankly did even in 2020, right? And how do we know that, right? I think one of the main ways we know that is where our investments occurring, and we don't see much. I mean, I think in some measure, the DCCC, the campaign arm that's trying to maintain the House of Representatives on the Democratic side, they announced this 7-figure AAPI media plan, right? So we know it's $1 million. And I sort of scratch my head thinking, you're spending $1 million trying to reach 23 million APIs in this country. That's maybe 25 cents a person. It's pennies on where it needs to be. Please add another zero at the end of that, because that I think barely even gets us into the ballpark, 10 million, right? And so we know that they're not making the investments that they need to, and yet our people are still feeling somewhat motivated, right? We have the threat of Donald Trump, sort of staring at us still, unfortunately. We have the exacerbated rhetoric from the right against not only our community, but all people of color that is still ratcheting up the hate and violence, geared towards our community and many others. So we have not seen sort of a downtick, frankly, in the hate and violence. It's still happening, and it's going to continue as long as we've got these ultra right-wing, MAGA-loving, folks on the right who they themselves, they realize that they know they're doing this, and yet it's not stopped them in the least. So we have to do a lot more. We have to invest a lot more into our community. We have to get more progressives elected to be the front lines, and frankly, send a signal to the right that not only won't this be tolerated, but there's going to be consequences if you continue to spew out this hate, which will lead to the further violence even.
Yeah, without a doubt. And that's something that I would like to think more people would fully appreciate, particularly hopefully coming out of this pandemic, where we saw the numbers and attacks against Asian Americans, particularly East Asians here. And it just seems to be something that is rising. And so not to necessarily engage a demographic that has been on the receiving end of considerable hate just seems like a lost opportunity to ensure that you can meet people's needs. And it seems like candidates, as I think you've noted at some point, they really have to engage people, Asian Americans, beyond crime and education.
You're absolutely right, and I want to maybe hone in on guns and how the right, and specifically the NRA and also the NSSF, the National NSSF is the lobby for the gun industry in this country, right? And so what they have done is extremely vile, because they know themselves that there is a lot of fear in AAPI communities all around the country. They are actively marketing the selling of guns to our community like they've never done before. So just think about the vileness of this, right? So the right spews this hate, and this vicious rhetoric. We get afraid because their spewing of hate is leading to acts of violence against our community. Our community then reacts by purchasing guns because we're being directly marketed to, thinking that somehow guns are making them safer, when in fact, all the stats show that it really doesn't. Suicide rates grow exponentially when there's a gun in the household. We doubt very much, for example, that training is occurring on the purchase of these guns. And so we've now seen record levels of gun purchases from the AAPI community, which is then going to lead to a whole host of unfortunate acts of accidental death, and suicide. And so this is just, we need to kind of stop this cycle and call it out for what it is. And this is the profiting off of hate in our country. And we're not the only community facing this right now, but it absolutely has to be called out in every way, shape, and form, because we've got to put a stop to this.
Absolutely, and the fear mongering, and you're absolutely right about kind of this upshot of having people invest in these guns, and then it creates even more significant problems from there. And it all kind of stemmed from these fears that have been created and stoked by, as far as I'm concerned, the right. And it's a very scary thing. And I'd like to think that there are some representatives out there who are investing in change and addressing these issues. Would you say that anyone out there on the left is doing a pretty good job?
In terms of gun violence prevention awareness?
In terms of addressing the needs of the AAPI community?
I feel like we're on an island of our own, unfortunately. And I think in large measure, most AAPI groups are still very underfunded. We've come, we're newer on the scene, frankly, politically, right? We didn't really participate. We didn't really vote much until like Donald Trump got elected. And then I think we started to get more engaged civically all around the country. But even though there are now more organizations around the country than ever before, you would think that we would see exponential investment, especially considering the fact that our community came out to vote in record numbers, something I spoke about on your program a while back, which is we came out in record numbers in 2020. There was a 47% increase in voting between 16 and 20, right? This has never happened before in the history of our country where any one demographic has increased their vote share. And so we need to see commensurate investments in our communities. Unfortunately, it's not there yet. But all we can do is try to preach and hopefully we'll be able to turn this tide around.
Absolutely. I want to thank you so much for joining us. That's Varun Nikore, AAPI Victory Alliance Executive Director.
Thank you so much.